Hi, I'm G Carr, and this is
Chelle, or Chelle put a welt on.
We are going to talk about coaching mixed level practices today. First, we wanted to talk a little bit about why we got into coaching mixed level practices and why we thought this was so important. We both started about 10 years ago, like nine and a half years ago, and it was really common to where everyone, all skill levels were thrown in together. And often that was an environment that wasn't great for learning for everybody. So sometimes the practice might be a little more geared toward the advanced, and then the lower level people weren't getting experience, and then vice versa. And then sometimes it felt like a little bit of a bullying, not bullying, but people who are upper level were a little frustrated working with lower level people, and vice versa. Felt like the upper level people were being too aggressive. So we've really worked over these years to figure out how to integrate all of those skill levels together and make it challenging for everyone.
A little bit about us personally. G and I both skate at Rose City. We skate in the Wreckers program currently, which is the recreational program. That being said, it's a pretty competitive level recreation program for all intents and purposes, just simply because the size and scope of Rose. Currently, Rose City has about 600 active skaters between our junior and adult programs. We also coach juniors home teams. We have a championship game coming up, and G has coached a number of other things, including juniors travel team, has coached the Wheels of Justice B team, has been on a Rose City home team, and I coach the adults weekly in the Wreckers program, and then I also remote coach a WFTDA team out of British Columbia. So that's kind of a little bit about what brought us here. We've been doing this together a long time. Feel like we've had some learning and things that have come out of it, and hopefully can help you and answer questions and move forward with great mixed skill level practices.
Okay. I basically cover the information there.
Okay. So it looks like we've got a mix of people coaching both juniors and adults. And from the looks of it, a lot of you have small practices with under 10 people, but then there's also a pretty good chunk that has in that 10 to 20 range as well. So we'll kind of be speaking to both of those today in the mixed level practices. We do once in a while at Rose have a big practice that's 25 and up, which has its own challenges that go with it, but we'll speak primarily to those two lower numbers of people since that's more common in most derby leagues.
All right. So some of the pros of having mixed level practices is that it's actually quite efficient when you know how to organize it. You are being able to get more people on the track of all skill levels instead of having to segment it out like this is for this level, this is for this level, and having all those times. It's really good for the skaters, learning how to do and seeing what other skaters more advanced are doing. So you can really learn off of each other in that way. So that's a great, and it's also great for the advanced skaters to be able to come and help and learn how to talk about what they're doing, which also makes them better at what they're doing when they're able to help somebody else learn that skill, which is then making them like better leaders, knowing how to communicate, and possibly even being coaches themselves one day.
In derby, we all know that oftentimes there's one or two people who coach. And so our coaching mixed skill level practices is a secret way of building up other people's coaching skills and helping them discover that they enjoy coaching. We have a couple of regular skaters at our practice who now also help coach the 101 program, which is our very entry level adult programming, as well as people coaching in the juniors program. So being intentional with how we run our mixed skill levels helps those higher skill skaters get those skills to support skaters as they're coming up.
So with a mixed level practice, you want to keep some things in mind. One is that foundations are important for every single level, from 101 through Division I, top 10 teams, you need to be working on foundations. And so in every practice, we have a segment of foundations that we then build on to higher level skills. We also believe very strongly that all skill levels can be learning strategy. It may be more modified and considerably modified for the brand new ones, but we've found that when we start putting them learning actual strategy, that they come along much quicker. So we highly recommend including strategy even very early on. What am I going to do there? So some things to consider is if your program has a sort of rhythm to it. Do you bring in new boot campers or new fresh meat every so often? In that case, you can kind of make more of a training arc. And so what we have is about every 2 months, we get new people out of our 101 program. And so we'll just be mindful we're kind of going to back it up a little bit on that day, and knowing that the advanced people can still get a lot out of reviewing some basics, bringing it back, and then we'll start to ramp it up to higher level strategy until we get another round, and then we'll kind of go back as a review.
So as we move forward with this, one of our outcomes out of today's webinar is to give you a sample practice plan and build onto these things that G just outlined. So how do we keep all levels physically and mentally engaged? How do we keep all levels challenged? That thing G talked about based on our early Derby experience of being either overwhelmed versus bored, kind of the two spectrums of engagement when you look at both ends of the Derby spectrum at people at a mixed level skill level practice, including foundations, endurance, and strategy for everyone, and really creating a supportive learning environment. So what additional goals do you have for practice, and how are we going to meet these goals? Before we go on to how we're going to meet these goals, G talked a little bit about the rhythm and thinking through how that happens. And I'm just going to throw this slide up here. You probably can't see all the details, but you could pause it and zoom in. We can make it available on Rule 56's Facebook page. But this is a little bit of a flow chart for how the Rose City program works. So we do have a dedicated 101 program, which I know a lot of leagues offer, like an intro to Derby, some other type of program. At that level, they're being taught basic falls, a basic plow stop, start of a crossover, just those initial safety skills to move them into our mixed skill level practices. Once they've cleared that, then they come in, and we use a tape color system to help differentiate between skills. This is incredibly helpful as a coach, especially at Rose City, where people come and go in and out of practices. At the Wreckers level, there aren't required practices unless you're trying to make bout eligibility. So we have a lot of skaters come and go. G and I are fortunate enough that the practice we coach has a really regular rotation of people, but being able to look at the bench of who's gearing up and saying we have a lot of people in red tape, and those red tapes are people who are just out of 101, learning those basic skills, learning control, all of those pieces. The yellow tape at Rose City is a self-assessment process. When skaters think that they're ready, they can ask coaches and MSR checkers to clear them for that higher level of impact. Really moving on to be MSR cleared, which we call our green level clearance, or GLW. So if we accidentally refer to our GLWs, those are our skilled skaters that have their MSRs cleared. The nature of our program means that we have skaters with years of bouting experience in that GLW, as well as skaters that have just cleared. And we actually are big enough. We have two different levels. We have an L2 and an L3, which are people moving towards being drafted to Rose City's home teams. But having the tape colors and having the skill differentiation on their helmets is really helpful as a coach. It's helpful as guest skaters come in or people drop in to know what level of impact they should be taking and giving on fellow skaters, and just kind of keeps us all on the same page when we talk about mixed skill levels and how we're working with them.
All right, so how do you meet these goals of having a successful mixed skill level practice? First, co-coaches are key. I know a lot of people don't have this ability to have multiple coaches, but if at all possible, having two coaches at least at a mixed level practice will go a long way. That allows one person to kind of focus on the whistling and the timing, and another person to focus on giving feedback. Another way that we'll do it is about halfway through the practice or partway through the practice when we do more strategy-based things. Chelle and I will split the track, and one of us will go with the higher levels and one of us will go with the lower levels, and just work on the same strategy with the lower levels, but just a little bit step back. So having the co-coach is very important. We do work together on our practice plans ahead of time. We usually either text or talk in person, and we'll come up with things we want to go over, and then one of us will write it up. Typically, we have somebody take lead I mean, for Wes, we've coached so long that it's just kind of fluent. It's like, oh, you're good at this, so you do it. And like, okay, I'm good at this one, so I'm going to lead this one. But if you're new with somebody, it is good to talk about that ahead of time. What parts is your co-coach going to lead? What parts are you? It might be that one of you is always like the leader and the other is always the person who's filling in information, and that's fine too. So again, I said, like, when we get to some of the strategy stuff, we will split sides, and that's super helpful to give that targeted, making sure that the higher levels are challenged at their level and that the lower levels are challenged at their level. If you can't have a full co-coach, definitely think about assistance, and that is using other skaters in the practice, mostly the higher level skaters generally you would use. You would let them know ahead of time. You know, when you get there, it's nice to say, we're the coaches, here's who's going to assist, or here are the two co-coaches. Again, on Mondays, we're always there on our practice time. And so we kind of already have our rhythm. We don't have to say it every time, but if we have new people, we make sure to always say, like, here are your coaches, here are people who might be assisting. With those assistant coaches who are the skaters in the practice, you can, you know, only pull them out for certain things. We always like to use those people for our demos so that, you know, we're kind of on the same page with what's happening. And then you'll have some drills where, you know, you'll have them maybe lead, or you'll do some mixed drills where you'll have the higher level people working with the lower level, and then you'll do the drill again where they're working with similar levels. So it's a way to get them all helping you so you're not doing it all yourself.
This year in our juniors home team, we've been doing this with some of our more experienced skaters, just to continue to grow leadership skills and give them space to learn something new. So we'll work with them on maybe a skill that they have that's really strong and help them build out a way to teach it in the moment. And draw them in as assistants, where they are then leading a specific, they're not leading the whole practice, but they are leading a specific drill, talking about how their body mechanics work for that drill, how they find success, and giving them an opportunity to take on a leadership role. And so within a juniors program, it's really great to do that. You're not asking too much of them because you're just doing 1 or 2 drills in a practice. But we do include them then. Here's the practice plan. Here's where you're going to be part of it. And then they also know that they're going to help out with demos and things like that. If you have captains in your juniors program or just some older skaters that have more experience, this is a great way to have them work with coaches and in a well-balanced way where they still get skate time and development as well.
So another point I wanted to add is that if you have anyone off skates for injury or anything, definitely make use of them. They can be blowing whistles, timing. You can say, hey, on this drill, I want you to give them feedback on this. But, you know, engage those people, and they'll have a lot to offer. And you're also then teaching them some coaching skills.
A lot of times at our mixed level practices, we'll have a higher level who might be coming back from injury, doing less contact. And so we'll match them up with the red levels and have them work on those skills. So they're still working on it, but taking less impact, but also able to articulate it. So keep in mind how to engage all of your skaters, whether they're on skates or off, in those capacities. So G's already touched on this a little bit around having a practice plan. We highly, highly recommend always going into practice with a plan. Like G said, a lot of times we've maybe just texted about it. Again, we've been doing this a really long time. But sometimes we get really excited about drills and we want to build out, you know, how do we build up to a certain strategy, or how do we build all these things together so it feels like a cohesive practice? So about 90% of the time we have a written practice plan. I'd say there's a little bit where, you know, life gets in the way, but again, we have a repertoire that we're working from. So be thinking about your goals in a mixed level practice. You know, even our juniors home team is fairly mixed level. We have skaters just coming into clearance versus skaters that have been on skates for 7 years because they came out of our pedals, which are tiny. So thinking about that, in creating a practice plan, we assume all skaters have completed some type of 101 program. So if you are also integrating those skaters, you may want to think differently about how you do that, because their basic skating skills will need some work. So moving forward, though, when you see our sample, that's an assumption that is made. We incorporate dynamic warm-ups and to include a lot of skills that we don't often coach specifically, but like during warm-ups, we may give little pieces of feedback, but we found that just giving skaters time to skate, they learn these skills. So we'll do 1-foot glides and transitions and C-cuts and those different things, stepping and things in our dynamic warm-up process. And again, that giving that minimal feedback allows them to develop the skills. It's funny because as they get to our MSR assessment process, a lot of times they don't realize that they've been taught all those skills, but we have just incorporated them into pieces like warm-ups and into initial drills, so they can do them, but yet it doesn't feel like, stop, now we're going to teach you all how to step or how to grapevine, or something like that. They're just a part of what we do for warm-up.
Okay, so I just want to add on a little bit there. If you do happen to have if you don't have a 101 program and you've got skaters coming in, just create a little side plan for them. It's a shame when skaters come to a practice and they just have to stand there. So you can easily give them little things to work on, like, on the outside, I want you to work on do 15 plow stops. Then I want you to work on transitions to the left, transitions to the right, and occasionally go check in with them. Ideally, you would have a co-coach who could be checking in with them. But try to, if you have to incorporate it, try to give them real things to be working on other than just skating laps on the outside.
For example, this Monday at our practice, we had a couple of skaters that were lower level, but were coming back from an injury or doing reduced contact. So they participated in a lot of our foundation skills, but once we got to some contact skills, they stepped out. And I took just a quick moment in between drills to get some cones out and break down a couple of things for them to be working on in the center of the track. And then might jump in and out. And again, the benefit of having a co-coach is that I could give them a tiny piece of feedback and not take away from the whole practice. But I was able to keep these couple of skaters engaged and still learning something they needed to learn. So I took one of the foundation skills from earlier and kind of built on it into a couple skills they could work on with a couple of cones in the middle of the track.
Okay. So one of the ways that we tend to do our practices with mixed skill level is, and some people will do this over, like they'll have a certain practice that's geared toward endurance, another one that's geared towards strategy, and so on. We tend to do them all in the same practice, and that is just part of what our program is like, that we are doing it all together. So we tend to have foundations, and that includes all your stops, edge work, one-on-one blocking, sometimes even two-on-one blocking, some jammer footwork too, and skills like that. And then we'll also include an endurance in every practice, and that might be, some type of lap game, or a lot of times our endurance, people don't realize it's endurance because we're, say, having you jam for a minute doing the Madison drill or the mini Madison, where you have the one jammer going back and forth the whole time, or things like that. So we'll get the endurance in every practice in some way, and often in multiple ways that people don't really know that they're doing endurance, but they are. And then usually in the second half, we'll spend some more time doing strategy. And by strategy, we don't mean just jam starts. It's strategy like, okay, jammer, you're in this situation where you're caught at the line. What are your options for getting out of this? Or, okay, blockers, you're having a hard time covering the line. Let's work on various strategies for being better about covering that line. So we do work on the bigger things like mid-jam strategies and jam starts and things like that, but also make sure you're broadening your idea of what a strategy is. And it includes a lot of derby.
If you end up doing some scrimmagey type stuff within the practice, think about running different lines. Full contact lines versus modified contact. When we talk about modified contact, we are talking about not coming in with power. So you can still hit, but more in the pushing. So you're not making running large hits, but it's really about control and containment in that modified contact, which is something that every level of skater can be working on. And so we expect our MSR cleared skaters to have the control needed to adapt their level to modified contact, to balance out those numbers.
So one more thing, the title is have a practice plan and the flexibility to change it as needed. And so I want to cover that, because we will come up with really, fairly detailed practice plans at times, but we are always there willing to like scrap things or be like, oh, hey, we were going to try this skill. we actually need to back up and break it down a little bit more. Or, oh my gosh, they got this totally, that was no problem. Let's take it to the next level for them.
That usually happens with our juniors.
Yeah.
Us adults are slower and we overthink things, but with the juniors, we're like, oh, shoot. And again, I mean, juniors practices, you want to have lots of extra things because engagement and how long it takes them to get things is just quicker. So a few other considerations when you're thinking about your practice plans. This is something we've done with a little more intentionality this year, but it was to incorporate a rule of the day into our skills practices. This includes hand signals from officials, what the words are. We found that a rule of the day helps it not feel like you have to learn all of roller derby and feel a little bit less overwhelming. So if we're going to talk about chest catching, I'm immediately going to talk about clockwise. And directionals, because especially our newer skaters will have that tendency to get up on both toe stops and run the other direction. So we'll talk about what that penalty looks like. How do you avoid it? What are the skills you need to do? And so we try, some of the times this is specific, like we have a specific scenario we want to build into. Sometimes we just let it happen organically with what happens in practice. And we often do this kind of in that mid-practice time where people might want a little bit longer break. They've been skating hard. So we're not slowing down practice talking about a bunch of rules. But we also find that by the time our mixed level skaters, are ready to scrimmage, they have a really good understanding what the rules look like in gameplay. And it's always surprising our high-level skaters who have never paid attention to a specific rule or two, that they don't really know what happens. So I think it's a really good thing to meter and to put into your practice.
So Chelle had already touched on it, but we often use the practice plans between the juniors and the adults. And you just have to modify, and again, that's that flexibility. You can use the same practice plan, but maybe with adult skaters, or maybe you happen to have more newer level skaters that practice, you might just have to adjust it, like spending a little longer on something. And then with the juniors, being ready to move on quicker than you expected. The juniors do like to have some fun games. They'll almost always ask for apex jumping, which most of I think zero people.
I don't think I've ever had an adult practice ask for apex jumping, but our youth do all the time.
So, just having that flexibility, but basically you can use the bones of the same practice plan for both.
Because I imagine there's definitely some of you out there who, like us, coach both. And so not reinventing the wheel and understanding how to make adaptations for different learners, youth learners and adult learners, is really helpful.
Another point is, sometimes you get some shy skaters or skaters who are a little uncertain and they'll want to continually step out of drills. And on the one hand, we always want to make it safe for anyone to make that decision for themselves. On the other, it's also being aware, is there a way to encourage them to get back on the track and own their space? Chelle, you do a great job of this, of saying it at the drill, of telling the Reds, own your space, the higher levels will go around you. And I think that is really important for the skaters to hear. I mean, still sometimes somebody might be a little injured or something and not feel good going out there, and that's fine. They can still make that. But I think as coaches, we need to make that effort to let those skaters know that they deserve to be on the track too.
And this ties super closely into our next slide, which is around culture and values and what kind of culture you're creating inside a practice. And that piece is really important, of creating a culture where it's everyone's practice. They have a right to be on that track. I know early on in our derby journeys and the way practices were played, you just expected, if you weren't as good of a skater, to just step out and to make way, let the good skaters through. And we want to grow. We want the sport to thrive. We want the sport to have a lot of longevity. And we do that by helping grow our skaters and helping everyone feel like they're welcome to do that. So the cultural piece on how you manage mixed level practices is really important.
Yeah, we want to make sure that everybody on the track can say, I don't know what you're talking about. And we'll often ask, does anyone not understand this? And I think that we've worked to create an environment where people then aren't shy to say, I don't get it, because always there's probably 3 to more people who also didn't really understand and just weren't saying, or could just use the refresher. So we always want that to feel like that's something that everyone can say if they don't understand it. We also always try to encourage a culture of ownership, and that is both being there for yourself and saying, how do I feel in this drill? Is this where I want to be doing right now? Am I ready to say step up to the next level? And also taking ownership of everybody else on your team. So even though we're a rec program, we are one big team, and you do have to take ownership of like, am I going to help my teammates get better at this? So this isn't just about me and my derby skills. It's about how am I going to facilitate my friends, my new friends being better too. So it's ownership both directions, personally and toward the greater good.
As a coach, it relieves you of a lot when people are willing to take ownership for their own journey. I definitely hear from skaters who, complain about a practice, that it wasn't challenging enough or something. And I feel often that that's on them. You can always continue to challenge yourself and find ways. It might not be as endurance focused as you wanted or strategy focused as you personally wanted that day. But in this sport, especially as we're a DIY sport, and coaches are learning along the way too. I think creating a culture where people do own their derby journey and own their development and own those opportunities to seek out and ask for feedback, ask for support, but also knowing themselves when to step out. And this is hard. Not all adults have the same level of self-awareness. So I think as coaches, creating open dialogue around this and continuing to talk about it makes it more on people's radar, that they should be owning their derby journey, and yet they should also be supporting others at the same time. And that is going to look different from practice to practice. There are some days when I go out to the track and I'm a veteran skater in this program and I just want to skate. I just want to play roller derby and get out of my own head. And then there are other days where I really feel like I have the capacity to focus on building up others and supporting others. And it's okay to have both of those, but creating that balance and creating that conversation so it's not all one or the other.
So another part of this, the culture, is celebrating successes. And this is for all levels. And it was, again, looking back to when we first started, I don't feel like the newer people got as much celebrating as the more experienced skaters. And it's important to have that culture where everyone is celebrated where they're at. And so at the end of practice, we'll often sit around in our circle before we leave and ask, what did you feel strong in today? Is there anything that you grew in? Anything that you like, I finally got something. And it's really interesting because, creating this culture now, it's like a lower level can say, I finally got myself square when I was blocking, which is, a fairly great thing to learn. And then somebody else might have something that's a higher level skill. And everyone feels comfortable being able to say that to the group. And we can celebrate the successes together and understand and have that empathy of like, yeah, I remember when I was working on my left transition or transition to the end, to the inside, and still like cheer for them and be happy for their successes while you're having your own.
And we try to mix this up in a variety of ways. So it's not so rote that at the end of practice, there's always like, let's stand here and let's say something you feel good about today. So we'll ask it in different ways. One of the things the team we happen to coach, our junior home team's name is the Undead Avengers. So kind of zombie themed. And so at the end of practice, and we end practice right when one of the home teams is starting practice. So we go off into a corner of the hangar, which we call the graveyard, and have kind of created a tradition where this gets bounced around. But often we will ask, what is something you saw someone else do well today? And it always impresses us the attention our junior skaters give to their teammates. They are able to come up with such specific examples of the practice when you don't even think they're paying attention. Our juniors practice is after school, so their brains are mush, but yet at the end of practice, they're still able to articulate what they saw in their teammates. And even if it's a tiny thing, like in this one drill, you did this one skill really well, or it's like, I see you being so positive on the track all the time. but creating a culture where they're not just celebrating their own successes, but they're celebrating each other. And I think those personal successes, I feel a little bit stronger in roller in the adult program of helping people leave practice on that positive note, especially in a mixed skill level as people are up and coming. But at the end of the day, like, we're helping to empower people and to find strength. And that's the mission of Rose City. So I want people to walk out of the hangar feeling like, hell yeah, I did this thing today. And it might have just been getting a good one-footed plow stop. But at their level, that was the important thing. And I think creating a culture where you are celebrating those victories will help everybody have that positive mindset, hopefully coming in, but also while leaving, that with each other as teammates, but also as individuals.
Yeah, so the hangar is where we have our
Everybody knows the hangar.
Maybe not. But one more thing I want to mention, sorry, is about high fives. I'm a big high fiver. I think that it's a nice ritual. You can come up with another ritual if you want. High fives are pretty common. We'll often do it when we do partner work. We'll say high five your buddy after the end of it. And it's just that little bit of, it's like a physical connection. It's like, yep, I acknowledge you. We did this thing. I'll often, when we coach our junior team, really into high fiving when people come off the track, because whether it was a good jam or not such a great jam, that high five is there to be like, okay, let's let that jam go, whether it was great or not, and then you're ready for the next one. And it is that sort of like, it's a quick check-in. There's a Positive Coaching Alliance is something we have in the US. And one of their big things is like have some kind of ritual for letting go of bad things. They say like flush it down the toilet. I don't really like that, but I think a high five works in a similar way. So it's like this emotion to be like, okay, I'm letting that go and I'm ready for the next thing. And I think a high five does that in both directions, like to congratulate for what you did, but let's move on to the next thing, and also be like, let go of what that was. Let's move on.
All the high fives.
All the high fives.
Okay. How do we put this together in a practice plan? So this is basically what you're seeing is all of the things we just talked through. So when G and I create a practice plan, this is a very basic one. And we worked really hard for this webinar to create one where words would be shared, and we would so we tried to pick things that didn't have specific words that might be unique in the Derby community. As a sport that's developing quickly, we all know that we name things quickly and not always the same. I remote coach a team in British Columbia, and I'm always trying to figure out what they call a thing versus what I call a thing, so we can be on the same page when I'm putting together practice plans. So we worked hard, and hopefully everything in here for the most part makes sense to you all. So, warm-ups, we usually stop and have some kind of announcements, check-ins with people. And then we go into foundations. We have found with our practices that run, our Monday practices run about 15 to 20. We love using a circuit. With smaller practices, we'll usually do all of these skills together. But in a circuit, we'll take each section of the track, so the 2 straightaways and the 2 corners, and have 4 different skills that they're working on each of those. So it may be 2 different kinds of tracking. On here, we have hockey stops. We have plow stops, probably forwards and backwards is what we're doing. We may be doing some footwork skills, but this allows people to work on something pretty intensely for 45 seconds, but not overthink it, and then move on to the next thing. And again, we'll run the circuit with a huge variety of skills. We do circuits sometimes where they're doing partner skills, where they're doing things together or individually. We haven't done a partner one in a long time. Maybe it's time again. Yeah. But I like the circuit. I think it's a great warm-up rhythm because you're not doing the same thing for a super long period of time. We usually do the whole circuit, quick drink of water, go out and do it again, and ask people to up their intensity as part of the warm-up progression.
Yeah. Well, sometimes too, if we have a huge, like on holidays, Monday practice will be really big. We'll add a 5th circuit on the outside of the track just to get enough people working. And sometimes even in the middle, you can add cones or something to the middle. You can also, maybe do the first round 1 minute and then the next round for 30 seconds, but have up the intensity. It just depends on what you need for your situation. So after some foundations, we'll move into more foundations, but then more Derby specific. So often with a partner, we'll do a lot of one-on-one. we've got here like a few different types of one-on-one blocking, and then basically they're just upping the intensity and what we're asking of both the blockers and the jammers as they do it. We don't do this full progression every time. This is just a sample of a way to do a progression, but even to think about in every one of your practice plans is, okay, if we're going to do X, what's the next progression? Let's do that. And maybe have like 2-3 progressions of something. Because one, if you're just doing an edges warm up with one-on-one, that's really for the blocker to warm up their edges and not for the jammer. And then we do the one where you push middle, then to the line. That's mostly for the blocker to be able to warm up their edges forward and then tracking to a line. And so it's a little bit more for the jammer because now they get to work on pushing up the track. And so each one should begin to be more work for the jammer person too.
G and I are both primarily blockers, but we've been working really hard at adding more tools to our jammer teaching toolbox this year, and just practicing them more ourselves. So trying to be intentional in our mixed skill level practices of creating space where people are working on both those skills, both in our juniors program and our adult program. We've been working in 2019 to not expect people to commit to a position too early on, to make sure we're developing holistic skaters with skills that can both jam and block. Not as a requirement, but it makes you a better skater. I think, we kind of swung a long ways one direction where it was like basically get scrimmage cleared and then figure out, are you a jammer or a blocker? And then you find a lot of people who 2 years in don't like it, but they don't have the skills for one or the other. So we have tried to be very intentional. This practice that you're seeing is a lot of blocker words, but within it, we try to add in some specific jammer skills, and like the circuit may have jammer footwork skills or things like that. So we're building both throughout practice.
Yeah. And so every time we have a drill, we try to give every person in that drill what they're working on. We don't ever want, say, the jammer to be fully dummy or the blockers to be fully dummies, but everything that we're doing, it might be more jammer focused or more blocker focused, but the counterpart always has something that they're working on. Even if it's a jammer, it's like you're working on an edge at the line instead of a toe stop at the line, or you're working on that switch in, you're working on your pushing. And as a blocker, maybe you're like working on staying flat, even if ultimately, you're going to get beat by this jammer because we're giving this jammer a new skill to get around you and not letting you use everything. So every single drill you should have instructions for each person in that drill, what they can be working on in that drill.
And especially in mixed skill level drills or practices where you have different types of people, make sure you talk about what the goal of the drill is, what the outcome should be, so that the tendency to break the drill is less. So you don't have to go around the track correcting the drill, because people just want to play derby and jammers are just busting through. Help them understand what the outcome for a successful version of this drill. I am a person who really likes to tie it back into derby, even if it doesn't look like derby in the moment. So I talk about why this skill is important to derby, even if we're mocking something up that wouldn't necessarily happen that way in gameplay, but understanding why.
And another thing I think Chelle does really well too in practices is that
You're so kind today.
I know. Well, it's easy when you're so good. She does a really good job of like commenting on, this is a tool in your tool belt. So we're practicing this one skill right now. We know that you can bust through this wall, but that's not what we're practicing right now. We're practicing on you pushing at 45 degrees, or we're practicing on you not flipping around as a blocker. And it's just not that those other skills aren't useful. It's just that within this drill, we're practicing this skill so that you can have that within all of your derby playing once you're playing. So I think that is a really awesome way to say it when you've got anybody who wants to keep breaking the drill, to be like, no, we want to practice this skill right now, and we can practice, that's still a good skill that you're doing, but that's for another.
I often use the phrase just to put their guard down, is like, stop being so good at roller derby. So like, when we have somebody, we're like, oh, we want you to do this thing, but they just keep playing roller derby. I'll say, stop being so good. And then, so after that blocking progression, to go back to our practice plan, we may throw in endurance in here. Where this actually happens ends up all over based on the progression. It may just be a part of practice. This week on Monday, we did a bunch of tripod progression work where we were building different skills and then building into offense on that. And I found that it was pretty endurance heavy just in the nature of what it was.
Because we were having you jam for a minute. So your group say have 4, everyone jammed for a minute straight. And that was pretty endurance-y.
Yeah. So we didn't do something separate that was specific endurance. So in this particular practice, we do, and it's made up, whatever you want it to be. And I, like G said, I'd encourage you to it doesn't just have to be skating laps. There are all kinds of creative ways to do endurance. And like I said, this week, it was just practice. It was just endurance as a part of practice. So in the second part of this practice, we go into some single person offense, and what that looks like. And I'll let G break it down.
Yeah. So, I mean, we don't have to go over the specifics. It's just to show that you can do progression. It is nice to kind of group some things together. So if we're going to be working on offense, like show it from offense coming from the back, offense coming from the front, and then give that offense then various tools to specifically work on while you're also giving the jammer specific tools to work on. So sometimes, you want that jammer to punch through the middle. And so even though, you've got a flat 2 wall, the jammer is going to beat that. But the goal is for the jammer to be following their O or learning that skill of, okay, so your offense is coming from the front. They're going to sit on somebody. They need to punch the other butt. Of course, they could just juke them because they have the whole track, but that's not the drill. It's to learn how to punch as if there was more people around you. So I think it's just important to have that progression, have them rep it out in various ways, vary your O, vary your jammers, and really work on a lot of with offense too is reminding your people to communicate with one another. And that's a big piece of practicing offense is like going up, helping your jammers and blockers have words together. So this practice plan is this is a 2-hour practice. You probably would not get into turning it into 3 walls against O, but what you could do is the next practice, add that in. It is nice with O to make it a little easy for the O and jammers to have success by making it just a flat 2 wall. And it's good practice for the blockers because sometimes you're in that situation where you're 2 wall having to deal with offense. So it is still really good practice all around, and then make it harder, say the next practice by adding that third person, a brace to make it a little tougher.
So one of the things as we're breaking down the skills, Gina, like I said, we'll take a look around. What's our skill level breakdown? On the top of number 6, we have these offensive options to break down, and we have a pin, a screen, a cap, a hit, etc. We will look and see, okay, do we need to break down the mechanics of each of these because we have new people who have never seen them? And when we do that, we work really hard on using the knowledge of the skaters, not just us always telling people how to do it, but us, asking back out to the team, like, well, what is a screen? What does that look like? And having somebody set it up so that we are celebrating the knowledge on the track already and not just assuming that people need it taught by us. And back in that creating a culture of asking questions, we want to create a space where people can ask questions. On this particular practice plan, one of the great questions I love when our skaters ask is, oh, can I see Chelle do it? Or can I see G do it? Or can I see that 6-foot tall skater over there do it? I'm 5'2", and how I play and my playing style is very different than G, who's got 6 inches on me. And I love when skaters ask for that. I love creating that space where they can see it. G and I almost always coach on skates, but creating space where people want to see how a different body does this. We all celebrate that derby is a space that we can find our power and be strong in shapes and sizes and skills, and finding people like you or finding different ways of engaging the same skill. And that's where you utilize your skilled skaters and build their confidence. And like, actually, you do this a really cool way. Or sometimes even when G and I are watching a drill be done, in between when we want to improve or tweak it, we may have somebody we saw do it really effectively, break it down and say, hey, are you okay with coming up here? Show us how you do this thing. and building the rapport with our skaters so that they can trust that they can do that. And I'll do it to a red level skater. If I see a red level skater with a beautiful sit in their plow, be like, everybody watch this skater and watch the great form. And I think it's wonderful to find ways to celebrate, all levels of success.
Yeah. And just to also talk about how to get in the different levels within this practice plan, say, in the circuit, everyone's doing their own thing. Just let them be. In the blocking progression, you might have, say, one round of mixed, like say a higher level partner with a lower level, and then do it a second time where they're then partnered with the same level. Just depending on the flow of your practice, like try to get some of those in, but then also make sure that people are, for the majority of the practice, kind of practicing at level. So mostly the same level players are skating together. And then when you get to the strategy part, that's where we would likely split the track in two and have, Chelle on one side and me on the other, kind of breaking things down a little bit in a little bit different way. So,
and if you have a smaller practice, if you're working with under 10 people and you don't have the ability to break it down into multiple groups, have your newer skaters watch what's going on and then put them out there and do it in a controlled, let them find success in that. But don't just make them watch the whole time, so that you all can, so the higher level skaters can engage. Make sure you're including them in that process.
And Chelle and I will often jump into drills too, because we do skate, coach on skates, and we find that it's helpful. If I see a lower level skater maybe struggling with their one-on-one blocking, I'll go out and I'll brace them for a little bit. And I'll say, use me, and I'll give them instruction. Like, okay, move your feet this way, do this, get your arm down. I'll give them that instruction in real time and let them feel their confidence. Then I'll kind of back away a little bit and see how they're doing and then come back. And then even with upper levels, when you see that they're maybe struggling with the drill, you can go right in there with them and do the exact same thing, just at that higher level. And I found that really helpful in being able to coach on skates, jumping in and giving real-time feedback as you're actually doing the drill with the person.
It's not to say there aren't great coaches not on skates too. So exactly. If you are one of those watching that's not a skater or doesn't skate well and doesn't wear their skates while coaching, there's all these same ways to incorporate it. I do think if you are not on skates, then it becomes even more imperative to have those assistant coaches and have the supportive higher level skaters on skates to demo out drills, but to help give them all the words so that they're successful in that demo.
Yeah.
So they know what you expect of them if you're not on skates.
I think we've had some questions about how to integrate specifically jammers into drills more. And I think we talked on that. We did. We covered that.
We covered it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You're good. We're good.
Yeah, I think it's being intentional. G and I will also try to seek out people to help, like either watch or at another practice of our own. Like if we're at our own personal practice and there's a jammer teaching something, we will talk to them a little bit more to break that down so then we can take it to our mixed level practice and be able to break it down in a way that works. And like G said earlier on, sometimes we get things from higher level skaters. When G was coaching Wheels of Justice's B team, it's bringing something and then sometimes figuring out what are the actual basics of teaching that to mixed levels. So when we first started teaching soft chest catches, we realized we needed to do a little bit of work around how to be on your toe stops and how to be soft in your knees when you're on your toe stops and getting from toe stops to edges and things like that. So instead of starting with that chest catch, we realized we had to add some other elements first. So don't be afraid to look at the things. I would also encourage you to reach out if you the thing I love about Derby is people are willing to share so much. So if you see something in gameplay or you see something that a team's doing, I'd reach out to them and ask, how do you teach that? Or how do you talk about it? It's one of the things I love about Derby is learning that from other people and listening, when allowing space for your skaters and other people to take in new words. I will shout out to Jukebox posted a video a couple weeks ago around Derby form, and so much of it was stuff G and I talk about, but Jukebox used different words that I was like, I'm putting those in my coaching tool belt to be able to talk about how we get our weight and how we move our weight and engage our core So find those things and keep adding them to the words that you're using inside a practice plan to help everybody, especially adult learners. We can have a tendency to overthink as adult learners. So having more words sometimes can be helpful for them. So as we finish up today, we just want to review. First, we want to show you a picture of baby us. I don't know how many years ago. This was at 6 years ago, probably now. Not quite, maybe, at one of our first bouts.
We're not that tiny anymore.
Neither of us are that small, especially our legs. Yay, roller derby. Anyway, mostly for fun. And when G jokes about my tool belt, the other photo you'll see is a picture of us with one of the other home teams. I wear a physical tool belt when I coach our juniors because they always need something. It has duct tape, it has Sharpies, it has Band-Aids. It usually is holding a couple of asthma inhalers. So yes, I'm actually wearing a tool belt when I bench coach our junior team.
It's adorable.
So far, our adults can take care of themselves, but I usually end up with somebody's jewelry in there too every time. So anyway, just to summarize what we've been through today, I know we've given you a lot of information, but the summary of that is having a system to divide skaters by skill level, either visually, if you're a small practice, just knowing. But for us, that is kind of that make or breaks our success, because we can kind of gauge what we need to do as coaches on a given day based on who's there. If you are coaching a team that's all very similar in skill level, it may be a non-issue. That being said, continue to think about how you're integrating your newer skaters. If you are a team that is primarily a league that's just one team and you have a few people here and there coming in, be thoughtful in your practices to make sure they get track time and that they're getting built up equally to your skaters. And sometimes they might get tired faster, so they might not need quite as much skate time, so it balances itself out, but making sure all skill levels have space on the track.
Another is to have your co-coaches and assistants, as we already talked about. And then I wanted to add another point. If you are one of those smaller leagues where basically the skaters are doing a lot of the coaching, maybe you have remote coaches, or you just don't have quite the commitment of the coaches being able to be there. You are the coaches. Make sure and trade that role around. Don't be the person having to lead the practices all the time if you are the captain who's also the coach. Bring in other people of the team so that you're getting track time. I think a lot of times people get into that rut of I'm the one doing it all the time, and you're losing out. So bring up others on the team, even if it's you're going to lead this section of practice today. I'll lead this section. This person's going to lead that section. And of course, make use of those people off skates as well.
Have a flexible practice plan that reflects foundations, endurance, and strategy every single time. And again, if you are in season of a travel team, this may look different, but this is really around your mixed skill level practices as you're building up skaters throughout the season.
And culture. Culture is so important in Derby. We've all played against those teams where it's not been the greatest culture and it's not fun. But you have the power to create a really positive culture at your league. So do that. Ownership is important. Holding yourself accountable, holding others accountable is very important. And then, of course, celebrating successes. That's just the key.
Keep doing that.
Keep doing that.
Because that's what we stay in Derby.
Yeah.
And that is our presentation today. Feel free to reach out to either G or myself. G's actual Derby name is uppercase G, so it's uppercase at Rose City Rollers, and then I'm just Chelle at Rose City Rollers. We love to chat. I am pretty active on the Rule 56 coaching page. G is removed slightly from Facebook, so less active, but chimes in once in a while. So
especially if you tag me.
Yeah. So we love talking about these things, love talking about how we move skaters through their Derby journey and engage them at all levels. So thank you so much for joining us. I don't think do you have anything else?
No,
okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.